Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished professional from Brisbane, Australia, Suneiah Cullen. Suneiah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Suneiah is the Principal Advisor Transformation with Aurecon, and she's very passionate about sustainability. So Suneiah, let me start by asking you, when I was reading about you, you refer to yourself as a specialist generalist who has built a career in playing in the intercepts.
Yes.
Please help me understand this with an example.
Sure. I guess maybe let me start with framing it. I guess we as humans, we don't really exist as this one dimension, right? Mm-hmm. We have these layers and experiences that really shape us and evolve us, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that can happen through a series of interactions and intercepts over your life, you know, from when you're a child all the way through. And what I discovered, I think, was a little bit inspired by my dad. He had quite a vast career that covered, you know, from engineering into sales into working with multinationals. And I kind of thought, wow, that's really interesting. He wasn't just this one thing. And in my mind, I was always going to be a journalist. I was always going to be on TV. But what happened is very early in my career, I jumped to the dark side of corporate communications and media relations for more money. Let's be honest. I think I worked for a local media, which didn't pay as much at the time. But one thing that became really obvious to me as I moved in the corporate circle was, oh, hang on, people are wanting you to do something that's beyond the box that you've been hired for, right? Oh, that's interesting that you've got that experience, or you lived in Saudi, you can help us with a new market entry over here with our business going in there. And I thought, I was very curious about that, right? And then so what I've found, having that really open mind, is that if I've been open to those intercepts rather than saying, no, it's not on my checklist, but okay, maybe that sounds interesting. It's allowed me to step into these places that I think are almost like a no man's land, and to be able to take these shots almost at giving something a go, where nobody else was probably bold enough, I was going to say probably crazy enough on my side. So I think, this broad experience that I've had from being a journalist that really grounds you in being able to listen and ask great questions and to be able to put together context and content has really helped me to be able to step into strategy, business development, sustainability now, which is something I'm deeply passionate about. So
amazing. Thank you for a great response. So let's now talk about Aurecon. Tell me a little bit about the organization, and then we'll talk a little bit about transformation.
Sure. So we're actually an engineering consultancy. So we're engineers who also consult. We're based across Asia Pacific. So I'm here in Australia. I was actually brought into the organisation to head up a business development function over 10 years ago. The plan was always to stay for a couple of years and then go on to work for accounting or technology or something else like that. You know, I like things that are different and to be challenged. But somehow I've landed up staying for almost 12 years later. And I think it's because of the diversity that's in the organisation, and again, being tapped to try new things. So when I was brought in, I was setting up a team, scaling it in Australia, and also setting up our teams in Asia as well. And that was something I was very passionate about. My mum is from Bombay, India, and I've spent a lot of my childhood in Asia. So I think, you know, for me, that bond was really important. And I think, you know, bringing that diversity of culture and language and skill as well. And I was coming back from mat leave at the time with my first child, maternity leave, and my boss rang me from the airport and he said, guess what? We've won that job. You know, we had just spent 70-hour weeks.
Okay.
I don't know for how many weeks, like for almost 2 months, I think. And he was like, so we've got the job. That's great. And then we get ready to package it up and hand it over to the team that will deliver. And he's like, do you want to be doing this for the rest of your life? And I was like, no. And he's like, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't know, but I don't want to do this. And I think that's where it all started, like having leadership who really looked at the people that they have rather than the role that they just sit in and maybe the box that they've been hired for. That was probably the greatest gift, I think, one of the gifts I've been given, you know, that opportunity to step into something really unknown. So at that time, Aurecon, we had a new CEO for about a year, and he was kind of taking the organisation from a very in-the-box engineering firm to a very out-of-the-box organisation, really deeply embedded in design and discovery. And I was lucky enough to be at the epicenter of that. So really rolling out what was our future ready strategy, innovation, eminence, design, digital, all these things that are really kind of ambiguous, right? And I think, sound really great as a label, but when you unpack the box, what's in there? So that was really about shaping, shifting, scaling that and making sure that those things could stick in an organization of 7,000 odd people. Sometimes it's easier said than done. So we're at about year 8 of what I would describe as a 10-year transformation program. So quite long, a lot of short planks in there. But when I came back on maternity leave from my second child, I had actually worked with our energy team in the lead up, and we'd won some great design work at the time. And I had the chance to actually go work with them in sustainability and setting up that within our organisation. So our climate change practice, sustainability across our organisation, and really putting some focused investment behind that. And that's something I've always been deeply passionate about, and never in a million years would I have thought I could do that, right? So I think, again, I just think what a great gift to be asked if I want to be involved. And
we'll talk about climate change in a few minutes.
Correct.
But since you've been given some amazing opportunities by your organization across multiple areas. But let's talk a little bit about transformation. And it is always said that change plus growth equals transformation.
Yeah.
What is your perspective on transformation?
I think I would add to that, change and growth at scale equals transformation, right? I think if you can't scale it, it's not going to stick. So then I'd probably question as to, you've probably got a very expensive change program rather than transformation. That's my view. I think, having been in a number of different transformations in this organisation, driving them at other firms, either from the sidelines or from within, I think there's different models of success, right? Or different models of failure, whichever way you want to look at it. But I think, they're really great learning opportunities from all of those. The other thing I would say is that, I think people think, oh, transformation, we'll just go do this thing. Well, it's never done, right? It's constantly evolving and it's not linear. And I think it can be fatiguing, right? There is a lot of burnout for people who are involved at the center of it. So I think having that mindset and that team is really important to be able to get to that point that you are ready to transition and step into that transformation. I think also I'd say, for there to be growth and that change, it's got to be sustainable and it's got to be sustained. And I think sometimes we can forget about that. It's easy to kind of focus on the front end and the mobilization of it, and rather than the measuring and the fine tuning of it, and that kind of the evolution. In some cases, for some firms, that revolution, right? Because the environment around you can change if you're not reading the signals correctly. So I think, I think it's sometimes really nice to put a bow around it, but easier said than done.
Absolutely. But, Suneiah, most people in organizations that I have worked in don't like transformation. They like status quo and maybe status quo ante.
Oh, 100%.
So how do you persuade leaders to go through a transformation using all your communication skills?
Yeah, look, I'd probably say there's probably it's a two-part answer. One, persuasion, and there's a lot of layers and levers that sit in that. I think just on my side, perseverance. I think mentally, mindset, you've got to be very resilient and in the right headspace and very optimistic. I'm a very optimistic person by nature, right? I will always find a silver lining in something. And I think that ability to reframe is really important if you're the person leading the transformation, or if you're the leadership that's the face of the transformation, right? I think that's mission critical. But I think if I unpack persuasion a little bit and some of the levers rather than the layers, because if I unpacked the layers, we'd be here for about 2 days. But I think if we just look at some of the core levers, empathy, I think, is critical, right? If you can't approach something without understanding the people in the system and the systems at play, who's involved, what are they passionate about, what are the barriers for them, what's holding them back, what's driving them, the why behind them and what they want to achieve, I think is, you can't take a step forward without that. I think then once you've got that, you can begin to build that current state understanding. Where are we at now? Where do we need to go? What would success look like? And then it's that direction setting, that vision setting, I think where everybody wants to go, that North Star, but I think you've got to kind of take that step back to take that step forward. You can't just kind of, tumble turn into like that and think it will be all fine. I think everybody thinks it's, this light touch design, but there's a huge amount of discipline and dialogue that goes into that. Then from there, I think once you've got that, you can begin to build a landscape of, where you're at and where you want to be. And from there is a lot of diagnosis. There's a lot of discovery, a lot of interviewing, a lot of testing, a lot of fine tuning. That could be a week, a month, a year, right? Depending on the program and the scale of what you're trying to tackle. Right, if it's like system wide or just, one part of your organization. And then I think it's actually bringing it to life. And if I'm doing my job well, it's invisible, right? Like I think, for me, the marker of success is that the individuals on the front line who are owners of that are actually, they've brought it to life in their language, in their DNA, in the way that they think, talk, act. And really then, from my point of view, what I'm looking at is, have I actually helped move a large group of people from here where they are at this current state over to this desired state? Are they believing in what we're saying? Are they belonging with that in their behaviors and their actions? And I think, when you've done it well, and you also know when you're in it and you know that you might have to pivot and change it, or that we just haven't got the stickiness right as well.
Very interesting. So now let's move to climate change.
Yes.
You said that you now got involved in climate change with Aurecon. Tell me about the work Aurecon is doing in the area of climate change.
Yeah, well, I think we've got a few different prongs to that. Again, like I think, any organization who is in this space, it's not just a one-track approach. I think if you're really serious about it, there are a number of different pieces in your arsenal. When I was on maternity leave, actually, the business came out and had made their net zero commitment, which I think was actually really inspiring. We're one of the first to get out there and say, this is actually our target and this is how we're going to achieve it. But from there, where I was brought in when I was coming back was actually around, well, we want to do this thing. We think, it's in our DNA to actually help industries and organizations to help tackle climate change. And, our engineering DNA naturally plays to that. So, this, as well as a number of different initiatives, we're looking at that from an investment point of view with the board and saying, well, what could that look like? What should it look like? Where can we make the greatest impact for people and planet and prosperity? But equally, where can we make a profit, right? Because at the end of the day, organizations exist for that reason. But I deeply hold that belief that planet, people, prosperity, profit, they can coexist and they should coexist. Right. I think if you've got that purpose right and that stack and it's genuine and you've got the right expertise and the right experience, you shouldn't and could be doing that. I think that's a choice. And so a lot of my work initially was around, I think we're 3 years in. What does that investment look like? How do we take that capital investment and, get the breadth and depth, and how do we scale that and how do we accelerate that? And that's been such a wild ride for me because, I'm not an engineer and I'm not a scientist, and I have such gratitude, and I'm almost like a deer in headlights, when I work with that team. They're just brilliant in terms of their knowledge and compassion and the ability to actually want to make things better. So I think from my point of view, in terms of pure strategy and someone who's very passionate about strategy, but equally sustainability, it's these two worlds coming together. So it's been really great to actually help the organization and with our clients and say, but how do we help focus that? What are some of those choices? What do those scenarios look like? What do we focus on? What don't we do, right? Because sustainability and climate change is so big. You can't do it all and you can't tackle it all. So I think you've got to be really focused on what you go after and what you don't. So so we've got like a group-wide strategy and then our climate change practice. And then we've just got this enormous coalition of the willing, like across every part of our DNA. How do we help, make things better? It's as simple and as complicated as that.
Interesting. And, you are focused on food, health, and planet. What are some of the challenges we face in the area of climate change in these 3 areas?
Look, I think there is so much great reading out there. I won't try and condense, let alone repeat what's out there, but I think I'll answer it from my point of view, which isn't really from the science perspective, but really from a people perspective. I'd probably say if you're interested as an individual, World Business Council of Sustainable Development, that there are so many brilliant sources. World Economic Forum, who put out the most interactive, clever, engaging maps that can say, this is how one choice over here can actually impact a whole system over here. I think if you want to be informed and engaged and empowered, just hop online. There is so much credible information. But now that I've got off my soapbox lecturing, I think what's really important is if I take a step back, I think we've got to take the focus away from, as an individual, you must do more. What about your carbon footprint? To hang on, where's the institutional and industry directive, the scaffolding and the structures needed to help move a society from A to B, right? Because if we don't have that, We can all go recycle our soft plastics and, reduce our food waste, but, the mechanics behind it have to change as well. So I think that's really important. I think one of the other things we've done, and I'm probably showing my age now, but when I started working in media relations, which was quite a while ago, was very big at like these doom and gloom narratives, and that was very much a defense mechanism at the time as well for a lot of organizations. They're still hanging around 20 years later. Have they been successful? Not really. I think we've done a lot to alienate rather than activate and align people, that we've got to come together to take this on and to tackle climate change. We're not going to do it in isolation. We're not going to do it as these kind of fancy high-paid silos. We're going to do it by coming together. And then I think, if I put my transformation hat on, I think, again, if we think about climate change, it is a planetary issue, but it's a people issue, right? We're seeing that, especially in Asia, across Asia right now, in the Americas, like we're seeing that day in, day out. It is a people issue. So if I think about things like identity, how can we activate around identity to engage and align? How can we be inclusive in the language we're using, in the visuals, in cultural context, right? How can we bring empathy into this to bring people in rather than push people out? And then I think, if I put the transformation backend lens on, there's experience, right? We can use experience to make people help to understand, to make climate change relatable, to understand, what these scenarios, what they mean. What does like a sea level rise of that mean? Like you can't relate to it unless you can experience it. And I think then, we can actually help nudge people towards what's possible. But, we can only do that if we're bringing all of those lenses together.
Well said. The other thing that I've often spoken to many people who work like you do on climate change is that the pandemic seems to have given our planet time to heal itself.
Yeah.
I'd love to get your thoughts on, have people started to understand that Mother Nature can heal herself and bring it back? Or are we going back to the same old thing of destroying everything that we have?
Okay, two-part answer. Yes, I think the pandemic definitely gave people a chance to pause and reflect. And I think, when cities across the world were in lockdown, and people had time to look within and look out their windows, right? And I think it became very visible, right? The narrative was very clear to people that, the world can self-heal. But I think what's happened since then, and we've seen this through some of the work I've been doing with the University of Queensland here, some research we did during the pandemic and post the pandemic, is that people were almost making their own ESG decisions, if you will. Do I commute into the office? Do I drive? Do I grow my own vegetables? That type of thing. They were kind of self-selecting and self-deciding and communicating that, which was a huge maturity. But what we've found since then, and I think, you would have seen that too in the conversations you're having, is that we've reverted to type, right? If you think of it as a rubber band, we kind of stretched, but we've pulled back to the middle. And that's what we found with this research, is unless there's the system underpin, right, for people to stay in that stickiness and in that desired state, you will go back to where you were. And we've already seen that, right? Our targets and the consumption has unfortunately bounced straight back.
Correct. I agree with you. So I have time for two more questions, Suneiah. My next question is that, given all your knowledge on the area of climate change, etc., how can each one of us make ourselves more accountable to our own climate?
Yeah. That's a good question. I probably think about this way more than I should at all kind of hours of the night. I think there's a few things. I would say probably, if I put where I started my career at, keep climate change in conversation. I think it's the most important thing you can do, because if you're not directly in climate change, like I don't work as a practitioner in that space. So for me, what can I do? I keep it in conversation. Have that conversation with your kids, your grandparents, your neighbor, in your social circles, because actually when it comes to climate change, it's really important. People will belong and identify with certain groups or exclude from other groups, right? So if you can kind of keep it in conversation, model it, make it accessible, that shift and the opening of that funnel will be so much quicker. I think the other thing is be informed, be aware of some of the narratives out there. They can be a bit misleading. You know, the term greenwashing, it's doing the rounds, but I think it is a very real risk. You can't just kind of believe what's on the label, right? I think as a consumer, and you know, we're all consumers and consumption and rely on all things, you know, to have our mobile phones and our internet running and everything else. Be aware, be informed, be engaged, be and educated by it. If you're not sure, ask, Google. There are so many brilliant resources out there to help you make better decisions. And I think probably the other thing I would say is, you know, for anyone who's in an organization in a position of leadership or followership, to think about climate change, but not in a vacuum, because it's not experienced in a vacuum. I think the more we can put it alongside other social issues like livability, economy, housing, health, well-being, the more it's going to be accessible and we can actually achieve more together quicker.
Well said. And my last question to you, Suneiah, and this is for the many, many people who will listen to our conversation. Based on your own journey, your own knowledge, your experience, what would you say are 3 lessons you would want our viewers and listeners to take away?
I think I'd probably say one's maybe not a lesson, but an ask. Which, if I can have one ask and 3 lessons, I'd probably say, please have a conversation about climate change. You know, if it's with your family, your friends, with your, you know, your leaders, just have a conversation. You know, with your political leaders, whatever it is. If you can do that, have that conversation, you will be surprised how much it unlocks. So that would be my ask. And then I think I do have a few lessons. Probably the one thing that really stood out to me when I was reflecting on my career is back yourself, but be yourself. I think as a person of color in a predominantly white country, I think it's really important to not dilute who you are and where you've come from. I think it's too easy to do that, to fit into the system. And I just think I wish I probably would have learnt that lesson a bit earlier in my career rather than where I am now. I think it's also really important to know when to grit or to quit, right? So know what gives you energy, your North Star. But equally, if you don't know what your 5-year career plan is, that's completely fine, because I've never had a 5-year career plan. I don't even have a yearly plan. But I think know what takes your energy away. You know, I think if you don't know where you want to go, know where you don't want to go, because that's really important in helping, I guess, open up those pathways for you. And then I think too, if I think about just, you know, work, we're all employed by different organizations or either self-employed. I think there's always this duality between work and a worker. Sometimes it can dovetail really beautifully, and sometimes it can be a dichotomy, and it's, you know, a bit more abrasive than you'd like it to be. And that's okay. You know, I've definitely have times where I'm like, I need to take stock and rethink, does this actually line up with where I am as a human, right? Because we all have those multiple dimensions. Do I need to reevaluate or reprioritize where I'm at in my life and career? Again, I think I would have loved to have had that light bulb moment maybe a decade earlier. But I think having had kids really did make me aware that you can kind of have it all, but you have to shape it, right? No one else is going to do that for you. Well, and then I probably would just say, if you're not sure about taking that step, sorry, I've added a 4th, but I think take that first step. You never know where it's going to lead.
Very interesting. And on that note, and your amazing lessons, your first ask, you said, is to have a conversation about climate change with people around you. And your 3 lessons were back yourself, but be yourself. Know when to quit, know where you want to be. And the 3rd one is to take the time to rethink and reevaluate where you're going. Thank you, Suneiah, for speaking to me about your amazing journey, about Aurecon and the work you've been doing in the area of transformation. Thank you also for speaking to me on climate change. And I mean, I learned some very interesting new thoughts about climate change from you today. Thank you again.
Thank you so much. Oh, such a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.